Thank you, Asfar. Indeed, a very positive message to start the day. Build consensus, think collaboratively with a common economic interest. With this, I'd like to invite the co-founder, who's Ghayas Khan, President and CEO Engro Corp, who unfortunately could not be here. But we are joined by Nadir Salar Qureshi Saab. He's the Chief Investment Officer, Engro Corporation. So he has been with Engro, he joined Engro in 2017 as the Chief Strategy Officer. Then he was appointed the CEO of Engro Fertilizers. And last year, he returned to Engro Corp as the Chief Investment Officer. So Nadir Saab, would you please deliver your opening address?
Thank you, Amar. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So, for those of you who were hoping to see Ghayas, my apologies, and I'll try to minimize your disappointment. This might be deja vu for some of you, because I was on this stage 5 years ago in very similar circumstances. But I think the focus for this conference, and I want to thank Asfar for providing Pakistan this platform where we can share our views of the best and brightest that we have. This room captures the leadership of this country across sectors, across disciplines, and some of the most seasoned and smartest people we have to offer. And it's, I think, a tremendous showcase of what Pakistan offers to the world. But that requires us to take a long, hard look at ourselves. And I want to draw on a thread that was raised by Maheen on this very platform just a few weeks ago. So Pakistan is the 5th most populous country in the world, and it's less than 0.4% of global GDP. The question that we have to ask ourselves, given this existential crossroads that we find ourselves, where we are now at the mercy of a multilateral organization to bail us out of holes of our own digging. The question we have to ask ourselves, and this question, I must admit, is not mine. It was the question that Lee Kuan Yew used to ask when he founded Singapore, is what makes us relevant to the world? If you're the 5th most populous country and you're 0.4% of global GDP, something somewhere is deeply amiss. And when you're at the beck of a multilateral global organization, and all your friends have said, get them on board, and then we'll come to help, because that's our credibility, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is amiss? So how did the 5th most populous country end up being essentially irrelevant to the world? That's a really bitter pill to swallow, isn't it? We have this tremendous country, geographically rich and diverse, massive mineral wealth, a population that is young, vibrant, and yet we're irrelevant to global proceedings. I was, recently, there was a contingent of nearly a dozen of us from across Engro at Davos. And we heard Minister Rahman give an incredibly impassioned, eloquent speech about Pakistan's need for help from the global community. But other than that forum, and there was a dozen of us across there for a week, there was not a single session in which Pakistan was mentioned. And I ask you again, what does Pakistan offer that makes it relevant to the world? सवाल ये पूछने वाला है. And at the end of the day, if there's one thing I've learned in corporate life, it is you don't manage problems upwards, you manage solutions upwards. So given that that's my training, what I thought about is, okay, so what is it that we can bring to the global table? And the answer, there were only 2 answers that I could come up with. The first one was that population that we all talk about, right? So if play a very macabre experiment, what would happen if the nation of Pakistan didn't exist tomorrow and everyone who was a Pakistani citizen didn't exist tomorrow? What would happen in the world? It's a horrible experiment to play. Sorry that we're doing this early in the morning, but it does get better. Bear with me. The only disruption that would happen essentially is a number of projects in the Middle East would slow down because we're a very considerable part of that labor force. Our biggest export sector, textiles, is less than 2% of the global textile industry. That's a interruption, that's not a disruption. Getting 2% of the global industry replaced in a year or two, that's not a hard ask. Industries do it all the time, commodities do it all the time. Projects would slow down, and then that gap would be filled in a few years by workers from other emerging markets. That's it. Who misses us? So the question is, and I go back to what would make Pakistan relevant to the world? So now let's play an experiment on that population we talk about. And I won't talk about technology or the disruptions that technology can cause, because if I look at the title of this conference, Prepare for Disruption, we've already been disrupted. Please raise your hand if you think business is going per usual. Anyone who thinks their business is going as they had planned last year or at the end of their corporate planning cycle, anyone who thinks business is going per usual, raise your hand. So if it's not going per usual, then we've met the dictionary definition of being disrupted, an interruption to the usual flow of events and occurrences. So we've been disrupted. And what's been disrupted? The business model's been disrupted. So right after college, I came back. My first job at a college was Engro. I worked at Engro for a year, and then I got hired by Hubco. This is 1994. 93, 94. I was employee number 14 in Hubco, the first Pakistani in the engineering team. And hand on heart, at that point in time, there were only two power projects. Hubco was the first IPP, which was developed about the same time. If you had polled everyone in that company, nationals, expatriates, everyone would have said, these are the only two IPPs that are going to get built. The entire focus will be on transmission and distribution because that's where the problem lies. Generation isn't the problem. It's just the easier modular one to fix because you have a plant limit and plant battery and you can build a plant. That's the problem. That's what will get fixed. So Hubco was done off imported furnace oil, which was done off indigenous gas. That was pretty much the last project done on indigenous fuels until the Thar projects very recently. We have a nearly 30-year window where the entire edifice of our energy construct was built off imported fuels. Furnace oil and then LNG. The business model is wrong. You build the entire energy edifice of a country that has largely stable, let's call it that, exports, but the entire energy edifice of it is built off imported fuels. That is an unsustainable business model. And our business model is now being disrupted. 30 years of an unsustainable business model is being disrupted. It's as simple as that. Rule number one of getting out of a hole is stop digging. So we've built an energy edifice of this country with massive multilateral support, for which we were very grateful at the time. but it's an unsustainable business model. The business model is being disrupted. So, how do we fix it? Well, the first thing is you focus on indigenous sources of energy, because energy, you can't run a growing emerging market on entirely imported energy when your exports aren't growing. And I'm not going to get into policy on exports or trade reform and all of that. Let's just look at the plain macro of what are the sources of strategic strength we have and what can make us relevant to the world. So coming back to what could make us relevant. We have about 1.25 million enrollees in 1.25 million enrollees into colleges across Pakistan. 1.25 million. Let's assume a 75% pass rate. Maybe generous, but let's assume a 75% pass rate. And then you take the graduates across the country and you put them through a 6, 8, 9-month training program where they learn fundamental coding skills, just fundamental coding skills. And you get them a job doing code, basic coding stuff, designing web pages, solving those problems, which can command, let's call it, an income of $50,000 a year. Average programming salaries in the West are well over 100,000, but let's call it, so you're doing basic stuff, lower value stuff, 50,000 a year. That in itself would be an incremental amount of $9.5 billion incremental dollars in export. Because you've got the people. Now, if this looks like an insurmountable problem, because we're saying, you run these numbers, you're talking about, let's calling it a little over, it's 287,500 people. But let's not get precise where we don't have precision. 287,000 people would need to qualify for this program. Last year alone, Tata Consulting, one company, hired 100,000 graduates in calendar year 2022. It can be done. Companies are doing this globally. One company did 100,000. We're saying 287,000 people could get you $9.5 billion of export dollars in the country. These solutions exist. So Google's got a program out there online that tells you, run through this program, self-paced, it should take you 6 months, solve these coding problems, you get an interview with Google. We don't even have to recreate the content. The content exists out there. Those platforms exist. It's a question of doing it. And are people doing it? But that's a problem that the Asif Peers of the world look to solve, right? That they're at scale and they're building up. But the real opportunity comes at, let's look at the rest of the population of Pakistan that actually has access to an education. It's not about the quality of education. It's the access to it. So that's 4.5 million enrollees in matriculation schools. Let's again assume a 75% pass rate and assume that they go through a technical training program, let's call it 6 months, that qualifies them to be a certified factory worker in an industry in the Gulf. So I am talking about a 6,000 dirham per month salary. And again, at the qualification I made at the university level was 20% of those graduates. 20% of the graduates get that job. Let's go with the same assumption on matriculates. It's not the entire matriculating class. It's just 20% who we can repurpose and train this way with the certification. That would create $13 billion worth of export at current rates for the country. That's 23 billion. Our last 5 years average current account deficit has been as high as 20 and has been as low as 3 in COVID times, but it averages about 17. You plug that hole within 2 years. These are not hard asks. The platform exists, the people exist. These holes can be plugged within a 2-year time frame were we as a nation and as a group and as leaders to commit to this cause. That was part of the solution. The other part of the solution is, again, what makes us relevant. So if you recall, Punjab used to be the granary of Asia. Before Thailand and Vietnam and China became the agri powerhouses as they are, Punjab used to feed all of Asia. During World War II, when the British took away the wheat crop to feed troops in Europe, it caused the largest famine Asia has ever seen. By some accounts, over 1 million people died. So this was the granary. If you look at agricultural yields in Pakistan and just compare them with across the border in India, if we were to get to match Indian yields just across the major staple products, wheat, sugarcane, rice, etc., lentils, we would create an incremental nearly $10 billion worth of export. Just incremental $10 billion of export from improved agri yields. Because my submission to you is Pakistan needs to look at what makes itself relevant and what is it that we'll be good at and how is it that we can get self-sufficient and live up to our promises that are being asked of by the international community to get us back on the rails. People and ag, those are our strengths. We need to leverage those strengths to get there. And all the platforms exist for this. Ag might take a little longer because you need to have better quality seed and you have to change certain behaviors, and so that can take longer. The people one, an incremental $14 billion, that to me is a much easier fix. It's technical training and certification. That pipeline already exists in Pakistan. Ag, we have great platforms, we have great companies. They just need a little bit of support. But changing farmer behavior is a harder one. But that in itself, not global average yields, Indian average yields, can get us to an incremental $10 billion worth of export. That to me, ladies and gentlemen, so collectively we're talking about 24 billion. Our deficit's never been over 20 billion. That's a sustaining system. And so I want to leave you at this thought where everyone, every leader in this room feels their business is being disrupted. We feel that Pakistan is at an existential crisis. So I was talking to Dr. Ishrat the other night, and he says people have short memories. 1998, geopolitics again played its part, and post our nuclear explosions, Pakistan was formally under sanctions. We're formally a sanctioned state, and I'm told we had $300 million in the bank. It was not even 2 weeks' cover. The country recovered from that to go on to successive 8% growth rates. We are, alhamdulillah, an incredibly resilient nation. Never underestimate that. Never underestimate that. And if you just go back and look at our history, we've been through worse. We were officially sanctioned. Today we talk about the number is just south of 3 billion. That's 3 orders of magnitude higher than where we were in 1998. And we recovered from that to get to 8% growth. I'm sure that with all the intellectual power in this room and other rooms like this in Pakistan, and the grit and determination that you have shown in the past, we will recover. And this too, like a kidney stone, shall pass very painfully. Thank you.